Hello and welcome, Exiles, to the day 5 update of the Stormweaver character. We now, you may notice, are Chaos Inoculated. We have the blue life pool. Main things that happened for this switch was a bit of respecking, prioritizing a slightly different pathing in order to get a little bit more ES, a little bit more efficiency with that, as well as a bit of a gear change. Mainly, we picked up the Midnight Braid. The idea was I want to go to CI and I wanted to combine it with swapping over to Mind Over Matter. So that way I'm not losing 1000 HP, but I'm gaining 3800 for 1000 HP as I'm completing the transition. So that way, if I lose all my ES in a fight, I still have another 4k EHP behind it that the enemy has to go through. Now, the idea was with Midnight Braid, and with Mind Over Matter, and with the ES recoup from the Stormweaver, the idea is the enemy's chunking us down throughout a fight. Recoup takes 8 seconds to occur. It's a much longer duration, so it's a much less slower response time in terms of how fast it juices up your HP pool. But the idea is, as the enemy's chipping me down and taking damage out of my ES, I'm building up ES recoup, as well as I'm building up mana recoup behind it, so that way when they get to the mana pool, there is a source of ES per second I have from ES recoup, as well as mana recoup that's been built up as they start getting to our mana pool, that this will be a bit more resilient. So say I open a breach and a bunch of enemies start all jumping on me at once, I am getting a lot of sustained damage from those two sources. Another thing that we're doing with this is we also anointed Adverse Growth. Now, this is another big source of mana recoup, 20%, but I have to be honest, I'm not sure this is the correct play. After playing the CI setup, I have been noticing with the loss of the life, freeze is a problem in my opinion. Now, this could be due to the fact that I swapped out of life base, and life, or your threshold for freeze, is based significantly on your life pool, and I really need Icebreaker. It could also be I just swapped to yellow maps and 10 res got chopped off of my res. I didn't realize there was more res penalties on yellow maps and then red maps where I lose another 10 res. So I started doing yellow maps and I started feeling a lot more susceptible to cold after having just capped my cold res. To my dismay, I came back and checked my cold res to find out it was no longer capped, and I was like, what the hell? I have the same gear. I was banging my head against the wall for a bit, looking over all my pieces, like, what did I swap? Eventually I found out, Googling it, that oh, apparently there's a res penalty that other people noticed, and I was like, okay, well, that's good to know. But anyways, yeah, Icebreaker, this right here, I think may end up being the better anoint, because I do believe after swapping to CI, I've died a couple times, and they've only been to one thing. It's basically been, I get frozen by a little bit of cold damage I shouldn't get frozen to, and then I have a bunch of enemies just all get to crowd around me while I have this really long freeze on me. And so most likely, I think this anoint will just be better than the 20% recoup. And on top of that, this anoint is cheaper. It's got the red, the yellow, and the purple of the delirium emotions, or whatever they're called, the oils, whereas this one has red, yellow, and it has that weird green one. The weird green one is quite a bit more expensive than the purple one. So what I'd recommend is, if you want to swap to CI, is I'd recommend picking up this belt, Midnight Braid. I'd recommend a bit of a tree swap similar to what we did here, as well as picking up this anoint here. Freeze is just too much of a big deal. You maybe can try to get away with a freeze charm. I've been using a gold charm for just extra juice, extra loot while mapping, but I don't think charms are really going to be consistent enough to be reliably a way to deal with a bad ailment. So I think Icebreaker is definitely the better play here. Now, the other significant change you might notice is you'll see there are green passives and there are red passives on my tree, or orange passives. And this is, we've finally incorporated the weapon swap passives, and I have to say, this cost me a lot of gold to do, to set up correctly, because what you end up having to do is, for your passive tree, you have to essentially unspec a bunch of nodes and then spec nodes specifically for the weapon set or for the other weapon set 1 or 2. So basically what happens is, what you end up doing is you have to click one of these arrows to say, okay, I'm allocating passives for this weapon set. So the idea is I basically had all these red passives, which are the weapon set 1. I unspec'd all of these nodes, and then I went through and I clicked weapon set 1 and I reallocated them as weapon set 1. And then with weapon set 2, I allocated all these curse nodes. Why am I doing this? It's OP. That's why I'm doing it. What ends up happening is, so I already have the Sigil of Power on my weapon set 2, where I just cast this to prepare for bosses. But not only that, I now have Conductivity set to my weapon set 2. If you go over to your gem setups, and you pull up these things and you pull up the arrow, you'll notice you have certain weapon sets checked. Weapon set 1, you want for all your main abilities, your damage abilities, your spark, your orb of storms. I actually probably should put that to weapon set 1 so that way I don't stay on the staff on accident. And then my curse I have on weapon set 2. So the idea is when I go to cast the curse, I have all of these curse passives allocated instead of the weapon set 1 passives. Eventually I'm going to get this other set of curse, and essentially what this ends up giving me is a bunch of curse duration. So I cast one and I will cast the curse once and it lasts a very long time. And then on top of that, it gives a lot faster of the curse popping than normally the longer wait delay. And once you get these passives here, it actually becomes an instantaneous cast when combined with the focus curse. This 30% reduced delay is actually just additively stacking with the faster curse or whatever. I think they mislabeled this. I think this faster curse is actually in game. It's coded as reduced delay because it is instantaneous that the curse procs on the enemies when you have these nodes allocated. I tested it, but ended up deciding I didn't have quite enough passes. Basically, I didn't want to swap out defensive nodes. I didn't want to lose defensive nodes when I swapped to my staff. Like when I swapped between these skills, I don't want to randomly lose a bunch of ES. So I opted to not use these passives until I have more offensive nodes that I can swap in and out between the 2 weapon sets, because I would have had to have swap out like defensive nodes, and that just didn't seem like a good idea to me. So I'm gonna wait till I level a bit higher. So that's the idea. The weapon set passives allow you to get a much more powerful curse. I believe our curse did do like minus 40 res, I want to say, before I did this, and afterwards it did like minus 69 or something. It's much more significant of an impact to damage, and just it's pretty worth it. Once you take the time to set up the gems where it's like this is weapon set 2, this is weapon set 1, you can cease to think about it, because it is completely seamless where you'll go this and start casting. I'm not really thinking about oh, I need a weapon swap. I'm literally just thinking, oh, I'm casting spark now, and the game automatically does the weapon swaps for you once you set up the various weapon sets. It's simply just a matter of clicking the side arrow, telling the game which weapon set has the various skill active for it. Make sure all of the main skills you want to be using, like your orb of storms, like your spark, are on the correct weapon set. The other big improvements we made as well is we got a 1 level higher gem, spark, as well as we ended up doing a 5 and a 6 link. And I went for inspiration and unleash. Now, in my opinion, what you should do first is probably inspiration. If you're swapping to mind over matter, without inspiration, you pretty much just spend your mana to 0, and it's not an effective defensive layer. With inspiration, it pretty much stays up for the most part. Like if I'm constant casting, you can see my mana here. It drains slowly, but not really. And I'm also not moving. I don't have the ability to move while I have clicked the move setup. I just like to have this as my keybinds when I'm doing interactions and trade and showing you guys things. But I actually play with controller, and this works the same with WASDA, where you can move at the same time while casting. And this node right here, Etherflow, which I have allocated, never drops. If you're playing WASDA or you're playing controller, these are just 60% mana regen. Don't even have to think about it. If you're always basically, if you're always like sidestepping while casting, which you can't do with click to move, which I have allocated right here, but let me show it with I'll just go to WASDA real quick just to showcase. So I'm walking, you'll notice I'm still moving. I'm not actually ever dropping. So you see on the mana regen, you can see it right here. 480 is when we're stationary, when we have the 25 reduce instead of 50 increase. And then you'll see when we're moving like this, it's constantly up, and it never really drops as long as you're doing like and you kind of want to do this anyways while fighting bosses where you're slowly kind of sidestepping. It works to dodge a lot of attacks, to be honest with you. So anyways, that's that ended up being a very good improvement to the build, is to include these 2 nodes here. Pretty free. If you're playing click to move, you cannot use this. But if you're playing WASDA or controller, it's 100% uptime, essentially. So yeah, that is some of the setups changes we've done to get to CI. On top of that, gear improvement wise, you'll notice we're no longer wearing Itziri's Disdain. And we did a bit of an upgrade for, I think, maybe our shield. Essentially, the changes we made is we got a little bit better shield. It's only slightly better than our other shield, but we're working towards the end goal of this shield, if in the late game, is going to be a shield that has a very high block chance roll, along with good ES, along with like int and res and stuff like that. But as we basically, I've ID'd 2 improvements now. My first shield, I think I bought. The second shield, I upgraded from an ID off the ground, and this shield I ID'd off the ground and slammed on to make a better shield. So basically, every time I see a strength in shield, I ID it, and if it has decent stats, I try to improve upon my current setup. On top of that, we bought a very high ES mana helmet. Ideally, you want something just like this, but you want to go for res rolls on the suffixes. Right now, I have a pretty big res problem, especially going towards red maps, which I opted for going for the higher ES and higher mana over getting some helmets that had better res. It's in a practical use case, the res is probably a bit more important. Like, let's say you gain 100 mana and 100 ES on your overall, but then you end up being 10 res under cap, and then you take, 50% more damage from enemies. The res is more important. So just think about your prioritization there. If you have good res cap already on other pieces of gear, then you can afford to just buy a helmet that just has good ES and good mana, but I'll let you use your judgment there. So we went for a good helmet upgrade, a slightly better shield. I think the boots are the same as what we had before. Rings are pretty much the same. And the gloves I got here are slightly better than my old gloves, and I still need to keep improving. I think my next upgrades are going to be my weapon and my 2 rings, and then hopefully I can start figuring out a way to fix my resistances, because resistances I'm really struggling for. You no longer can get res on jewels, so that's no longer an option. You no longer can get there's not really many res passives on the tree at all that I've found. This is like the only res I've really seen on tree. There might be a few other places over or down here, but I haven't looked too much down here. So yeah, res is a bit of a problem. But yeah, weapon upgrades I want to do next are weapon and 2 rings is probably what I'm going to shoot for on upgrading. But yeah, this is the CI mana setup. We're now quite a bit tankier. The main things that it cost to do it was getting some extra links so we could fit inspiration, and then we fit in the unleash as well. And then on top of that, we included a bit of gear upgrades for our helmet. If you have Adziri's Disdain, you cannot swap to Chaos Inoculation because the damage will still bypass your ES. Technically, it works if you click Mind Over Matter, so use your judgment on that one, but I would personally recommend getting a rare, as improving your mana improves your mana sustain, as well as improving your damage, and I think it's overall going to be a better option for you. It was about, when we swapped to this helmet, it was about I want to say 500 to 800 mana gain, swapping to a rare, so that is why I would end up recommending it. And then the curse swap, the weapon swap stuff helps a lot for DPS. So anyways, that's the updates to the character. Another big thing that might be a cheap upgrade that I haven't looked into, I've just been grabbing the gem off the ground when I get an improved gem, but ultimately, if you can buy an uncut gem, like a higher level uncut gem, if that's available on trade, that could be a very big, easy way to improve your character, because the uncut gems are tied to like the zone you're in. There's people that are in red maps right now that probably have a bunch of extra uncut level 20 gems. Buying one from them might give you a good way to get plus levels and have a big increase to damage, which maybe would be worth looking into. Anyways, that is the current setup of the character. Hopefully you guys like looking at these updates, and I'm going to continue to stream and continue to do updates of the video, and we'll see where we can take this character. I'm looking forward to continue pushing to red maps. Currently, we just started doing, I think, T8 maps or something like that, just taking our chill time, doing one tier at a time, finishing out the quest, and moving onwards and upwards with it. So anyways, yeah. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care, and peace out. Have a good one.